What if the entire newspaper industry got it wrong? Since the invention of the internet, the print sales have been declining. Glossy brochures, magazines, direct emails, and all the printed items have been replaced by a combination of electronic files, display ads, and web contents. Nowadays, newspaper and magazine companies are facing a transition period where businesses try to adapt to the change and challenges presented by the introduction of the digital media. This shift from print to digital has brought paper companies to transform and reevaluate themselves in order to survive. The opportunity to find fast and free news online on mobiles and tablets is appealing to the majority of the population, as they do not have to wait or pay to get informed about the latest news. As Varsani said, the circulation of printed newspaper and magazine is falling year by year, and according with the UK Addicts Bureau of Circulation, the overall print circulation fall of the 4% by year. This shift should not come as a surprise to those people who have been paying attention to the word evolution for the last decade or so. The general audience loves the glossy palpable paper, but our quotidianity is now digital. Recent studies have shown that people's attention span is decreasing year by year. Therefore, digital short, fast and personalized contents are more likely to be preferred by people. For example, digital edition of The Economist and Daily Mail are seeing their sales constantly rising. Recent studies have proved that even if the sale of printed magazines are dropping, not all the magazines and newspapers are suffering the same way. Since social media became part of our daily routine, celebrities and gossip-focused magazines are finding it difficult to keep up with the latest news. Social media gave us the chance to know the latest news minutes after they happened. On the other hand, business and political newspapers are being able to survive as they focus on the interpretation of economic situation and reflection on past, present and future events. Also, as they target a reduced number of people, they are less likely to be shared and uploaded on social media. Said this, in the last couple of years, businesses are slowly going back to the print route, this time focusing on a niche market or to a more target audience. The reason behind this shift is that consumers miss the feeling of the paper in their hands and the nostalgia of the old times. This report includes key findings from a survey, plus analysis and studies about the pros and cons of printed and digital magazines and their future. As previously said, businesses are continually moving, trying to understand the reader's needs. Therefore, understand and ask the audience's opinion about the matter is a fundamental step to be taken. A good way to interact with the audience are surveys. The reason why they're so important is that they allow companies to understand the weak points within their products. As surveys are a step to undertake in order to understand the reason behind customer behavior, a specific one about the future of printed magazine and newspaper has been run. The survey, which has been created on SurveyMonkey, got a total of 100 responses in a week, if anonymous. Even if the result can be considered good, it is fundamental to keep in consideration the fact that this survey got 100 responses and the world population counts more than 7.6 billion people in March 2018. Therefore, it cannot consider as a general opinion of the entire users of newspaper and magazines. As the chart shows, the 51% of the responses came from women and the other 49% from men. This is a good sign, and it shows that the survey is not focused on one gender. As the second chart shows, the majority of the responses came from people between 18 and 24 years old, followed by people between 25 and 34. Just 5% of the responses came from people over 55. The reason behind this could be that the channel used to conduct these surveys. An article from Think Digital First shows how people under 40 are most likely to use social media on a daily basis. Another interesting finding is that the 39% of the people answer to the question, do you prefer printed or digital magazine, saying that they prefer a printed copy of them. To those people, there are to add those people who said to be interested in both of the categories. With a total of the 60% of the responses, printed magazine and newspaper are the survey's audience favourite choice. The 10% of the audience declared to not caring about neither of them. This leaves the 30% of the audience who says to be more interested in digital magazine and newspaper. As the table shows, the majority of people who do not have a preference is male. Also, the female group shows to have more interest in printed version than male. As the chart shows, most of the audience buys printed copy few times ahead, with 39%, followed closely but never with the 35%. At the same time, more men declare to buy newspaper every day, the 10.42%, compared to the 1.96% of women. Lastly, the survey looked into customers' favorite categories. With 1/4 of the votes, the favorite categories is general news, followed by sport and health and fashion. Music is considered by the general audience as the less interesting category. Looking deeper into the female audience preferences, fashion becomes the most chosen one with 27.45%, followed by the others, which includes celebrities, TV, and lifestyle. On the other hand, the male audience favorite categories is general news with a 31.25%, followed by sport and health with 20.83%.
In the discussion of whether printed or digital newspapers and magazines are better, it has to be considered that both have their advantages and disadvantages. For instance, one of the main aspects that supports the effectiveness of digital news is the speed which they come with. Whenever something major happens in the world, it can be found online within seconds. Speed-driven journalism seems to be a trend the printed media cannot compete with. Additionally, receiving news on a mobile device is a truly handy advantage, since it makes these information easily accessible no matter when and where. As 81% of people own a smartphone, digital news are also a great way to target consumers. Along with that goes the fact that digital news do not require any extra space, as the consumer will carry their device either way. This, moreover, results in having no waste once a person has finished reading the digital paper. Nonetheless, whenever reading news digitally, it has to be taken into consideration that the source might not be reliable, as everyone who has access to a computer could publish authentic-looking articles without actually having knowledge about the topic, as demonstrated within a typical case of Wikipedia vandalism. Hence, a consumer of digital media is often likely to become a victim of fake or at least filtered news. A study has found that fake news are being shared and interacted with a lot more and faster than real news, which remains a true problem, as false information can influence business investments, political situations, and much more. Filtered news are not less concerning. As Bill Gates stated, technology, such as social media, lets you go off with like-minded people, so you're not mixing and sharing and understanding other points of view. The issue with that is that it leads to the lack of a common basis for agreement due to polarized information. Another disadvantage of smartphone use is distraction. Smartphone addiction is a common thing nowadays. So for example, when a person reads the news on a mobile device and gets interrupted by a notification, said person is likely to swap to the chat, being left with only a piece of information rather than the whole article. Regarding printed media, the probable main advantage is their trustworthiness, since unlike on the internet, articles will be checked before being published. This is being supported by a study that showed that 63% of people trust ads in printed newspapers and magazines against only 25% who put their trust into the internet. In addition, printed newspapers and magazines allow the reader to understand where the author is coming from, and hence what perspective the article has been written in, as some newspapers might have a political influence that applies to their content. With online media, it might not always be possible to gather this information about the publicist. Furthermore, printed media allow the reader to stay focused and concentrate on the information, as in contrast to the digital version, no notifications or anything alike will pop up and thus interrupt. This adds value to the traditional newspaper. So do emotions, as some people might buy magazines due to emotional value, perhaps as a souvenir from holidays, as a memory of a certain event, or because they are interested in a certain area. On the contrary, however, printed media are less practical as, besides having to be purchased in the first place, they have to be carried around and therefore take up extra space, unlike a phone that, as mentioned before, is with the consumer anyway. Moreover, printed newspapers cannot compete with online news when it comes to speed. By the time newspaper articles are printed and published, people are likely to already have heard about the event through online channels. This is being underlined by the fact that already at the end of 2010, more people have received the news digitally than from printed media. Last but not least, printed papers create a lot of waste, as once the consumer is done reading it, the product will be thrown away. This is obviously not an issue with digital media. Nevertheless, the actual environmental impact of printed newspapers and magazines has to be looked at individually. When discussing the pros and cons of printed media, one major aspect that comes up is the environmental impact. Considering that it takes about 12 trees in order to produce a ton of newsprint, newspapers seem really bad at first sight. Therefore, it is surprising that the difference between printed and digital media in regards to the environment is not as big as one might think. According to a study from 2004, reading news online leads to carbon dioxide reductions, as well as a decrease of water, nitrogen, and sulfur oxide. Nonetheless, spending time online has an impact too. Obviously, it depends on the amount of time. Whereas using a digital device to read online for 10 minutes results in less CO2 than reading a printed version, this ratio turns around when the time online is raised up to 30 minutes, making the printed news more environmentally friendly. However, here it also depends on the kind of computer or mobile device being used, just as it depends on what paper has been used for the newspaper and what happens to it once the consumer is done reading it. Recycling plays a big part in this discussion, since a recycled quality weekend paper results in 1.9 kilograms of CO2, whereas one that is being sent to landfill accounts for 4.1 kilograms of carbon dioxide. Thus, a person who purchases 7 typical paper stock newspapers a week and sends them to landfill could be responsible for up to a ton of CO2 a year, which can be compared to 2 short-haul flights. On the contrary, by purchasing a weekly, muslin paper printed in low-carbon stock and recycling it afterwards, this person could reduce their CO2 production to only a few kilograms a year, which is as much as driving only 5 to 10 miles in an average car. Overall, it is almost impossible to say whether printed or digital media is more environmentally friendly, as it depends on a lot of factors, as mentioned before. Whilst the printing process is continuously being enhanced, for example by using vegetable-based inks, and recycling rates keep increasing, lying at 72% in 2014, technology is also constantly being developed. Hence, one cannot simply compare digital with printed, but has to define what kind of newspaper and device is being used in order to put the stats into proportion.
By 2050, Bradley Wilson predicts that newspapers will cease to exist. Although this is quite an extreme viewpoint, there is some truth to his theory, as evidence has shown a massive decline in newspaper sales. During the last 9 years, the average newspaper staff size has dropped by 28%, a 1/3 loss in newspaper employees. There's been an ongoing decline in newspaper sales with the closing of newspaper stands and agents as well. This, however, does not mean that journalism or the need for well-trained journalists will extinct. News magazines, niche publications, online media and other media outlets will continue to be highly demanded for high-quality news reporting. The future is facing a change as the industry is transitioning, not declining. A lot of media companies are failing to see this, therefore suffering a decline in engagement. Some media companies have managed the transition very well, others have not engaged with the fact that digital distribution is huge, along with the importance of digital video for a media business. With increased globalization, creating improved communication links to being boosted by the internet and social media. National media networks like the BBC are now becoming global. National papers may be declining in their profits for prints, but due to greater engagement with international audiences, their publications are reaching more consumers. This will create stronger competition in the media for the future, as they will desire better resources to engage more people. This is leading to mass manipulation in news, creating fake news. There will be so many different opinions in the future, making it hard to believe what is real, and thus creating massive media confusion. The improvement of technology over the past 20 years has drastically changed how people gain knowledge of the world. A large amount of this is changing and manipulating our perception on life with fictional news. Greater competition in the media industry has forced networks to gain the best resources possible to beat other networks with more interesting stories. Hence, the media manipulates stories to boost views. Not only this, but most of the younger generation get their news from social media, most of the time subconsciously, without even remembering reading it. Nowadays, people spend so much time on the internet, which is updated every second with ever more unfiltered news, where anyone can freely write what they like without being monitored, as these sources aren't credible. Unlike news in a newspaper, information online can be shared on networks like Facebook, and within a couple of hours the entire world can see it. This is massively affecting our younger generation, who are beginning to believe things that they see online, which are completely fictional and untrue. This transition is impacting on mental health, people's lifestyle and body perceptions. The news is very powerful, and a large shift is occurring, setting to change the lives of our future generations. What has changed now that wasn't possible before with improved technology is the lower cost of magazine production. 20 years ago, it would have been a lot more expensive to create a 100-page magazine with thick paper with a matte gloss finish. From this, smaller companies have emerged to creating more niche magazines. The beauty of these magazines is they can condense a specific interest into one book. Unlike online, where one has to sift and filter through masses of online content, which may not even be real, but a lot harder. Magazines like Serial, a well-designed architectural magazine made from sustainable, good quality paper and card, visually illustrates concepts in this area which have been gathered by a group of experts in this field. Also, with this sense of niche, the consumers feel as though they only gathered this information, which makes it more special in comparison to online, where a fashion inspirational trend has been seen by millions, which results in a less inclined mood to get inspiration from that. What will be seen more of is the filtering of other smaller media groups, like local newspapers/magazines, dying out, as well as small regional news, due to competition from national papers which contain more relevance to what is currently happening, as they'll be more established and thus manage to get all the news first. As known, printed media has been on the decline since there is evidence of extreme sale declines in newspapers and magazines, but this does not mean that it will not exist in the future. The future of magazines is still promising, but the culture behind it has changed. There is something more visually stimulating looking at a magazine in its physical form, in contrast to online, where the reader engages less with the visuals. It's psychologically aesthetically pleasing. To conclude, digital media is in much higher demand, but both have their advantages and disadvantages. A digital format is much more effective, as it can be shared online as well as being accessed anywhere in the world with no environmental waste. As mentioned before, 81% of people own a smartphone, which has allowed people to become more interlinked with communication. This has led today's society onto being the victim of fake news created by non-journalists in an attempt to gain more profits. From the survey results and extensive primary and secondary research, it is clear that there has been a large shift in the media industry. Older generations only had the option of newspapers when they were younger, and have continued to use them due to habit. With younger generations growing up with technology, digital media is much more accessible online. The world has become much faster, and with new news every second which people want to know about, there's been a cultural digital shift. Although a shift is occurring, it is unlikely for newspapers and magazines to entirely disappear, as they retain a value which the internet cannot offer to readers. With the increased popularity in more niche media topics, it is also obvious that people trust newspapers more than digital media, due to the fact that digital media is full of unfiltered information, unprofessionally published. With the printed version, one can concentrate more as there is no other digital distractions taking place like notifications. In terms of the future, newspapers and magazines may still be used as people want to gain knowledge of the world from an unfiltered perspective. A reduction in newspapers and growth in digital media has had a positive environmental impact with a reduced carbon footprint. But with this comes the mass confusion and global manipulation of fake news, which is altering people's perceptions on political and lifestyle views. With more and more fake news arising, the transition continues to rise as mass market media companies are growing, buying out smaller companies to gain a much greater market share. In the future, these companies have the potential to gain greater power in deciding how they want to reach their audience, again leading to more fake news and the partly removal of newspapers due to their insufficient way of reaching their audience. Could this be the end of traditional newspapers? Could the growing market be an opportunity for more niche journalism in the future? Whether printed media will really lose against their digital competition, only time will tell.